Okay, well, our presenter is Mike Waters, and he will introduce his topic. I'd like to remind everybody to please mute your microphones. Um, it helps a lot when you're not speaking. And then we get to the um, discussion. You can turn your cameras on or just say hey. If you have a problem, we do have the chat room. You can type in a quick chat, hey, I can't hear, or whatever. So I will turn this over to Mike.
Thank you. Well, as Alan and I were chatting, this subject is timely for the 4th of July in many ways. And I imagine most everybody's heard of the book, The Harbinger, by Jonathan Cahn, who's a Messianic rabbi from New Jersey. And he's had quite a bit of coverage in the media, as well as being featured on many religious programs around the nation over the last several years. And that all centers around the Isaiah 9 prophecy. Now, I'd like to say that this is one prophecy that's a hindsight 2020 prophecy, and so that's what we're going to do tonight, is to look at this subject in hindsight with pretty much no extrapolation into the future, because this is something that's already occurred, and the question is, well, was this really something prophesied for the United States of America, especially New York City? And is it a warning to our nation? And so I imagine some of us are very familiar with the whole subject, and I'll take a little bit different angle on it tonight. And some others, it's totally new, and I hope there's enough information here to familiarize you with the basic concepts behind the Harbinger prophecy. So what we have is just basically a few verses out of Isaiah 9, but there's some very tremendously either coincidental occurrences, or there is something to this. Now, interesting, our founding father, George Washington, also fits into this scenario in a very significant way. It's just not something that's centered around recent events, but ties right into our national history. Our first president, our founding father, was a man of prayer, as we see in many depictions of him, and I'm sure many of us have heard the stories about the miraculous events surrounding his life, as well as the beginnings of our nation. Now, on to the basic prophecy. This is Isaiah chapter 9, starting in verse 8. And this is just the New King James Version. The Lord sent a word against Jacob, and it has fallen on Israel. All the people will know, Ephraim and the inhabitant of Samaria, who say in pride and arrogance of heart, the bricks have fallen down, but we will rebuild with hewn stones. The sycamores are cut down, but we will replace them with cedars. Now, these aren't very many words here. And of course, the prophecy, there's more to it, but this is, you might say, the heart and the core of the whole subject of the Harbinger. The actual core verse is verse 10. The bricks have fallen down, but we will rebuild with hewn stones. The sycamores are cut down, but we will replace them with cedars. Does anybody remember this cornerstone? And does anybody remember the formal ceremony dedicating this stone? This was a ceremony back in 2004. And take a good look at that stone. Okay. The basic thing that got this whole subject started was a speech the day after 9/11. And Senator Tom Daschle made a proclamation. And he quoted Isaiah 9, verse 10, word for word. But he did not quote verse 9. So let's go back one verse. We all know that we should study the Bible in context. In other words, we don't just take one verse out of context. We look at the verse before, the verse after, maybe look at the whole chapter. But that was a big mistake that Senator Daschle's speechwriter made, was to quote one verse out of context. So this is what got some people wondering and looking at this subject. So if we go back to verse 9, it says, all the people will know, Ephraim and the inhabitant of Samaria, who say in pride and arrogance of heart. Notice, who say in pride and arrogance of heart. The bricks have fallen down, but we will rebuild with hewn stones. Now, why did Senator Daschle choose this very verse? And why did he not quote verse 9? This cornerstone was a symbol of national pride in 2004. But where is it now? Does anybody know? We can go back and wonder, well, why did our politicians choose that biblical verse of all the biblical verses that could have been quoted in our time of national devastation, and when people were needing a rally point? So you might say that's coincidence number one. And to tie George Washington back into this is a photo of George Washington's private pew in St. Paul's Chapel, which is actually directly adjoining Ground Zero. Now, interestingly enough, this chapel was untouched by the falling bricks, concrete, and steel. You can go there. The chair is still there. You can view it today if you like. The question is, well, of all the devastation that happened at Ground Zero, why is that one little chapel still standing, basically intact? George Washington was known as a man of prayer, and he regularly attended St. Paul's Chapel in New York. Now, another interesting side point of coincidence is sycamore trees grew well, and they still grow well in New York. So ever since the founding of our nation, it was a tree that they planted right in the city. Wall Street had many sycamore trees, but Wall Street was originally called Buttonwood Street, which is another sycamore tree. Okay, this is what a sycamore tree looks like. It's a deciduous tree.
I think that was you. I delayed. That was a black.
And okay, this is what the sycamore tree at Ground Zero looked like after 9/11. There was a 100-year-old sycamore tree that took the brunt of the falling debris, protecting St. Paul's Chapel from destruction. Now, this sycamore tree was totally uprooted while the chapel was virtually unharmed. And you can go there and you can see the intact chapel. You can see memorials to the sycamore tree. because it was just almost a miraculous thing as to how that happened. Now we go back to the verse. The sycamore trees are cut down, but we will replace them with cedars. You know, of all things that our government could have decided to do, of all the trees they could have selected, they decided to replace the sycamore tree with a relative of the cedars of Lebanon. An evergreen tree was chosen to replace the fallen sycamore tree. Now again I ask, was this only a coincidence? Sadly, the first Ararat's tree did not do so well. So a second tree of the same basic type was planted. But I ask the question, where is that second tree now? You see the new building in the background there. That's just how close this was to ground zero. I mean, it's just basically right across the street from where the buildings collapsed. Okay, let's just skip ahead to Isaiah 9, verse 14. Now, in response to the defiant proclamation that was made in verse 10, verse 14 says, "Therefore the Lord will cut off head and tail from Israel, palm branch and bulrush in one day. The elder and honorable, he is the head. The prophet who teaches lies, he is the tail. For the leaders of this people cause them to err, and those who are led by them are destroyed." So this is a warning right to the leaders of the nation. Again, why did they have to choose Isaiah 9 to keep on quoting? You know, the sycamore trees were cut down and the cedar trees were planted. Again, only a coincidence? Okay, let's just go back up to Isaiah 9, verse 11. "Therefore the Lord shall set up the adversaries of reason against him, and spur his enemies on, the Syrians before and the Philistines behind, and they shall devour Israel with an open mouth. For all this anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. For the people do not turn to him who strikes them, nor do they seek the Lord of hosts." Now, another interesting coincidence, that the people who were involved in the destruction of the Twin Towers were also Middle Eastern. I mean, it's just the coincidences just go on. Now, this is a sycamore tree large enough to protect a whole building from destruction. That's basically what the sycamore tree looked like, and then you saw the burnt up trunk there. But okay, the coincidence. Our leaders had a proclamation to rebuild, even quoting these very verses. They replaced the fallen bricks with the hewn stone. They replacing the fallen sycamore tree with an evergreen tree, very closely related. Again, there's one reality that the present administration would like to forget. Our nation was fully dedicated and consecrated to the Almighty God by our founding fathers. The Valley Forge Chapel is pictured here, and from the days of fasting at the news of the onset of the Revolutionary War to the bitter days at Valley Forge, George Washington had one response to adversity: prayer for divine guidance. Okay, I have some interesting information just going back now to the dedication of our nation at the founding of our country. America, like Israel, is a nation dedicated to God. Do you know that our first president's first official act, along with Congress and Senate, was to dictate or dedicate the brand new nation, the United States of America, to the Supreme Almighty God? America and Israel are the only two nations who, at their beginnings, were and are dedicated to the all-powerful God, our Creator. This is a fact to know and understand, because a nation dedicated to God is held to a higher responsibility as opposed to nations that are not. Now, it is true that there are nations who follow the biblical standards, and at times revival has taken place. For example, England in the 1800s had a very strong revival, which in turn made its way over to America, and great preachers like Charles Grandison Finney, Charles Haddon Spurgeon, Dwight Lyman, Moody, Billy Sunday, and many more preached the gospel. That was the golden age of the American revival. The only other country to be dedicated to God at its beginnings was Israel. Even though Israel had two kings prior, it was not until the temple was built that the nation of Israel truly became a nation. It was under the reign of King Solomon who finally built God's temple, which was a symbol, the very heart of the nation. We read in 2 Chronicles 7 the following. Thus Solomon finished the house of the Lord, and the king's house, and all that came into Solomon's heart to make in the house of the Lord. And in his own house he prosperously effected. And the Lord appeared to Solomon by night and said to him, I have heard thy prayer, and have chosen this place to myself for a house of sacrifice. If I shut up heaven that there be no rain, or if I command the locust to devour the land, or if I send pestilence among my people, if my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face, and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven, and will forgive their sin, and will heal their land. If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves, and pray, and seek my face, and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven, and will forgive their sin, and will heal their land. Mine heart shall be there perpetually. Now mine eyes shall be open, and mine ears attend to the prayer which is made in this place. For now I have chosen and sanctified this house, that my name may be there forever. And mine eyes, as for thee, you will walk before me, as David thy father walked, and do according to all that I have commanded thee, and shall observe my statutes and my judgments. Then will I establish the throne of thy kingdom, according as I have covenanted with David thy father, saying, there shall not fail thee to be a ruler in Israel. But if you turn away and forsake my statutes and my commandments, which I have set before you, and shall go and serve other gods, and worship them, then will I pluck them up by the roots out of my land which I have given to them. And this house which I have sanctified for my name will I cast out of my sight, and will make it to be a proverb and a byword among all nations. And this house which is high shall be an astonishment to everyone that passes by it, so that he shall say, why has the Lord done this unto this land and unto this house? And it shall be answered, because they forsook the Lord God of their fathers, which brought them forth out of the land of Egypt, and laid hold on other gods, and worshipped them, and served them. Therefore has he brought all this evil upon them. So in these 10 verses, there's a lot that we can learn from, because, while the United States is not the 10 tribes of Israel back in the time of Solomon's temple, there are some things to be thinking about. So, number 1, God heard the prayer of the king and accepted the king's dedication of Israel to that of God. Number 2, God will chastise, but his promise that his mercy will continue based on the actions of the nation. 3, God promises to hear the prayers and will be attentive to a humble people and will dwell with them, blessing them and watching over them. 4. God promises to the king that he will bless the king, his rule, and the nation if the king maintains God's statutes and judgments. In other words, keep God's word. 5. God also states that if the nation turns away from God to serve other gods, worship them, then he will pluck up the nations by its roots out of its land and also cast his house out of his sight. So the birthplace of Israel is on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. But do you know where the birthplace of our nation took place? It wasn't in Washington, D.C., or it was not in Philadelphia in 1776. Our nation was conceived in Philadelphia, but we did not become an official nation until April 30th, 1789. That was the day that George Washington was sworn in as America's first president. In fact, there's a very, very famous statue marking the very spot where he was sworn in. He was inaugurated on the island of Manhattan, New York City, in front of the Federal Hall located on Wall Street. And Wall Street is where our nation actually became a nation. Federal Hall was the then current home to the First Congress, Supreme Court, and executive branch offices. The building is still there, and there is still a statue of George Washington standing with his hand outstretched, taking the oath of office. Why was his hand stretched out? His statue was portrayed so that people could see and remember that George Washington took the oath of office while resting his hand on God's word. On this day, things were planned out and seemed to be going smoothly. But as the parade was nearing Federal Hall carrying Washington in a horse-drawn carriage, it was suddenly realized that a Bible had been needed for administering the oath. Why? Because it was written into the law, and a Bible was required to be a part of the ceremony. History shows that it was Parade Marshal Jacob Morton who hurried off and soon returned with a large 1767 King James Bible. And this was the Bible in which Washington swore his oath of office. The same King James whose charter ordained this country to sharing the gospel and also gave the English-speaking people the only authorized Bible in history, the King James authorized version of the Bible. So on April 30th, 1789, our first president was sworn in at Federal Hall, our first seat of government located on Wall Street, Manhattan, New York. On April 23rd, it was announced to the nation that at 9 o'clock a.m., the church bells across the nation will ring for a half an hour, calling the entire nation come to their house of worship and to commit our new government to the Most High God. The Daily Advertiser reported the following. On the morning of the day on which our illustrious president will be invested with this office, the bells will ring at 9 o'clock, when the people may go up to the house of God and in a solemn manner commit the new government with its important train of consequences to the holy protection and the blessing of the Most High. An early hour is prudently fixed for this peculiar act of devotion and is designed wholly for prayer. The Daily Advertiser, New York, Thursday, April 23rd, 1789. After being sworn in, George Washington delivered this nation's first inaugural address to a joint session of Congress. In it, Washington declared, "It would be peculiarly improper to omit in this first official act my fervent supplications to that Almighty Being who rules over the universe, who presides in the councils of nations, and whose providential aids can supply every human defect. No people can be bound to acknowledge and adore the invisible hand which conducts the affairs of men more than those of the United States." As the newly inaugurated president, George Washington's first act as president was to lead on foot the vice president and members of the Senate and House of Representatives proceed to St. Paul's Chapel. It was at St. Paul's Chapel that our nation was dedicated to God. Our newly founded government joined our president, along with the rest of the nation, upon bent knee and in solemn prayer, asked for God's favor and blessing upon this nation. It was at that time that our nation was committed by our leader and the people to God Almighty. It is at that very moment that the ground with which our nation was dedicated became hallowed ground. This ground was from that point on became a special landmark to our nation and to God. Our nation has faced God's judgment just as Israel's hallowed ground was stricken. So has our hallowed ground also been stricken. Our hallowed ground, and with which St. Paul's Chapel sits, and where our nation was dedicated to God. God Almighty is none other than ground zero. God is giving the same 9 warnings now to America to urge the nation to repent. One of the harbingers was a sycamore tree at ground zero, which after the destruction of the Twin Towers was replaced by an evergreen. This is a move that Jonathan Cahn believes follows the Isaiah prophecy. Now the replacement tree is gone, he said. The sign of the nearing national judgment has been manifested. The Eretz tree has fallen. The 7th harbinger now speaks of impending judgment. The tree of hope, the symbol of America's resurgence, is dead, he explained. The keepers of the tree of hope did everything they could to save the withering tree. They even changed the soil in which it grew. But no matter what they did, the tree continued to wither away and die, said Cahn. Finally, in the spring of this year, the tree planted in the place of the fallen sycamore of ground zero, the symbol of a rising America, was uprooted. The 7th harbinger is no more. He had written in his book, a prophetic word concerning America's Eretz tree, the tree of hope, saying, "But when a nation such as this places its hope in its own powers to save itself, and its hope is false, its true hope is found only in returning to God. Without that, the tree of hope is a harbinger of the day when its strong cedars come crashing down to the earth." Only recently did Cahn discover that the harbinger's prophecy has come true. The news came to him from those who had recently walked the grounds of St. Paul's Chapel in New York City at the corner of Ground Zero, where the Eretz tree had been planted in the place of the fallen sycamore. Unlike the planting of the tree of hope, which was done publicly and followed by a publicized ceremony, the tree was uprooted with little notice given out of the public eye. In fact, it was only after several inquiries were made that the tree's disappearance, that WND, the article reporting this, found out what happened. The tree of hope, the symbol of a resurgent America, was uprooted in the spring of this year. The day after its uprooting, it was entirely destroyed. In the Bible, said Cahn, the felling of the cedar or the destruction of the Eretz tree is a particularly stark sign given to a nation nearing the day of its judgment. It is one of several continuing manifestations of what appears in the Harbinger, coming true after the book's release. What these continuing signs signify is that America's progression to judgment is continuing, if not accelerating. Combine this with the fact that America is indeed continuing on a rapidly accelerating course of apostasy from God and moral collapse. And it comprises an ominous warning. America is approaching a day of judgment. So there we have it. The tree that we see is the cedar tree that would not stay alive. And that was the second one. The first one didn't stay alive. And that tree was called the Tree of Hope. This is a coincidence. Okay, after the cloud of dust began to clear, police and officers and rescue workers and onlookers gazed at the little plot of land at the edge of the ground zero. Kahn writes in the Harbinger, there in the middle of the ash and debris that covered the ground was a fallen tree. It would soon become a symbol of 9/11 and of ground zero. And it was a symbol, but one much more ancient than anyone there could have realized, and one carrying a message no one could have fathomed. The tree at ground zero was struck down on September 11th, was a sycamore tree. As Isaiah 2:12 through 13 states, for the day of the Lord of hosts shall it be upon everything that is high and fallen, as the mighty are spoiled. So, where is the hewn cornerstone now? Now, this is another story. When Robert Penn bought the inventory of a stone company on Long Island in 2012, he acquired forklifts, rock slabs, and the cornerstone for the skyscraper, once known as the Freedom Tower. The 20-ton granite block had been laid at the ground zero on July 4th, 2004, in a ceremony attended by hundreds. Mr. Penn said that his workers and customers often had emotional encounters with the stone, and will find it's a piece of the history that we love, honor, and cherish, said Mr. Penn, 44 years old. The chief strength is in touching it. So what does the future hold for our nation? You know, it's, have we been warned of an impending judgment upon us for our sins? Have our leaders defiantly rejected the consecration of our nation to Almighty God? Or is this all random coincidence? And we will rebuild better and stronger than ever, because we are a people that has progressed beyond ancient myths and taboos. That's what our leaders are telling us. They're telling us that there's nothing to that Harbinger book, nothing to that biblical prophecy. So they actually removed the Ararat's tree after it wouldn't stay alive. They actually scrapped the rock, the gazette stone, that was intended to be the cornerstone, just because it was in the book and they didn't want people coming to look at it. You know, according to our leadership, all that stuff in the Bible, all those Old Testament prophecies, all of the old ancient myths and fables are just things of the past. And the message is, we will rebuild. We'll be stronger than ever. We'll be greater than ever. We're an exceptional people. And we will rebuild. That's what our leaders have been telling us. And there's no room for any repentance. There's no room for any acknowledgement of our founding fathers. And no room, especially, for any acknowledgement of what our first president dedicated this nation to be. So I guess that's the basic outline. And of course, the Harbinger book by Jonathan Kahn goes through point by point, detail by detail, and if it's something that is piqued your interest, I would recommend the book, as well as there's many presentations that you can watch on YouTube. And it's something that's really on the religious channels lately, especially his follow-up book about the Shemitah and the significance of the land Sabbaths and the Jubilees relative to our nation. And it's just a subject that is just grabbing a great attention by Christians, and equally a subject of denial by our present leadership and government. In fact, not only did many of our senators and congressmen, governors and mayors use the word, "we will rebuild." Just recently, our president wrote on the building when it was dedicated, he used 8 words, which Isaiah 9 verse 10 contains 8 words. The middle word is rebuild in the prophecy. President Obama's middle word in his dedication was rebuild. I mean, is just that another random coincidence? I'm thinking that there's something to this. This is a prophecy we can look at, hindsight 2020, zero speculation. All we have to do is look at the facts. And then we can draw our own conclusions. And if we really believe that the United States is a nation that has a Christian background, that our founding fathers were very much believers in God. Now, they had different religions. They had different denominations. But they agreed that we should all have the religious freedom to follow our beliefs, all acknowledging that there was a God, that there was a higher power, and as George Washington firmly believed, that the Almighty God can and does guide the events in history. And he just, I didn't know how much to do with this presentation, but I have a lot more notes where I have quotations from George Washington. And I would suggest that also as an excellent study is to go back and look at the quotes that George Washington made and to look at his history. He has a whole list of answered prayers, miraculous acts which were needed just to save our Revolutionary War from being snuffed out. There was obviously supernatural intervention that even allowed our nation to begin. And I think this is just historical fact. There's records of dreams and visions that George Washington had. You know, he was actually, you could consider him a mystic because he did live a very devoted life. He spent his time in prayer and fasting, and he was very single-minded in all of this, from his youth to his until his death. And so he was almost like a high priest at the beginning of our nation, in guiding and leading the people and leading them in prayer. So, as Christians, we can kind of see that our nation was devoted to God, and it was consecrated in words and in prayer. And we can see that things are going a very opposite direction lately. But I guess I'd like to open it up for discussion, and then we can maybe review a few points or bring out more things. So I guess we can open it back up.
Oh, wrong mouse. Okay, I think Chris Deweese has something to say. His dark screen of death is up.
That's right. It's the mysterious dark screen. I'm raising my hand. I've read the Harbinger and things like that. We talk about our assembly pretty frequently. What Jonathan Cahn was focused heavily on financials in this book. And when we've studied in our little Torah group, our assembly, whatever you want to call it, when we've studied these financials and to find out about the 7-year Sabbath, the Jubilee year, and how much Yahweh knew that economics were going to get messed up and there were going to be cycles, and he was going to have a release of debts and allow people to return to their land, because he knew that this cycle was going to continue of indebtedness and how sloppy economics are. And the way the Western powers work is a debt-based economy, and the cycle has to happen. What Khan is talking about is these events that have happened throughout history of financial crashes that line up with the Hillel 2 calendar holy days. I think there's a lot to be said about that, and the fact that most people live their entire working careers enslaved to Citigroup and Wells Fargo and completely in debt for your car and your house and everything we have in this debt-based economy is sinful, and it affects our ability to worship in a proper way, that we should be able to go and not have to worry about taking off work and stuff like that. But as you could tell, I agree with your synopsis, and I could go on, but I will shut up at this point. Thanks.
Actually, we have an incredible number of convergences coming up this fall. And I can give a little background, because our nation has been intertwined with the nation of Israel since its inception. And we've been probably the #1 ally to Israel, and a very strong affinity. Israel was created as a homeland for the Jewish people in 1917. It's at the end of World War II. The Ottoman Empire was defeated, and the British took control of the whole Middle East. And so they came up with an agreement of reforming the nations in that area. And they set up a homeland for the Jewish people. And the mandate is called the Palestinian Mandate, and the nation was called Israel. And at that time, it actually went right through to the Jordan River, just like it is now, with the West Bank being part of Israel. And so the nation, in a sense, was reborn at that time, but it still wasn't officially recognized as a nation. But now, if you count the number of Sabbath years, in 50 years later, in 1967, Israel did not control Jerusalem at the time, and in 1967 there was the Six-Day War, in which they took control of Jerusalem. And they took control of Jerusalem in the Jubilee year of them being back in the land. And now this next year, 2016, is the next Jubilee year after that point. Now there was a prophecy by a Jewish rabbi way back in the Middle Ages, and he said that there would be, I'm forgetting the exact year, but he said that there would be 10 Jubilees, and then Israel would regain the land, Eretz Yisrael. But Jerusalem would remain desolate until the next Jubilee, which was 1967. And then Judah regained Jerusalem, which was also prophesied in the book of Zechariah. And his further prophecy was that after the second Jubilee was complete, after that time, the Messiah would come. And this was back in the 1500s, I think, that this prophecy was given by a Jewish mystic. Okay, then we have the blood moons, and we have the tetrad, the blood moon tetrad they call it, which is basically lunar eclipses. And the last time there was a tetrad was in 1967. And the time before that was in 1948. And then it was 6 years before there was a period of 600 years with no lunar tetrads. And the year that was 1492, the year of the Spanish Inquisition, and the year of Columbus setting out and finding the Americas. So we have the final blood moon of the tetrad coming up this fall. We have the second Jubilee beginning, and then also the third Shemitah period since 2001, because in 2001 there was the Twin Towers were taken down. 2008 our economy was taken down, and now this next Shemitah is we're wondering, well, okay, we saw 2001, we saw 2008, what's going to happen in 2015? And we just have this tremendous convergence of events, and it's really, I mean, it's just piquing a lot of people's interests.
Okay, Chris.
Okay, all that is more great stuff. But my thinking is, it could be the end of the age, it could be the end of the era, but there's going to become a way where our Creator is going to release the people from their debts and our nation from its debts. And the fact that if you follow the Greece thing, where Greece had to get that, what the whole problem over there is that they haven't enacted enough austerity measures, which means pulling back from their entitlements, in order for the World Bank to loan them $284 billion, so that they could, from that $284 billion loan, they would then be able to make the minimum payment on their overall debt of $1.83 billion. And right now in Greece, they have shut down the ATMs and the banks, and people are rationing money because there is no money coming in. And the only way money is going to come into that country is in the basis of loans. And there has to be a way, a mechanism for our Father to release the countries from these debts and to release the individuals from these debts in order to restore things. And that's the Torah cycle of the every 7 years sabbatical year, and the 50-year Jubilee year is a cycle of restoration. And you very eloquently pointed out these points in history where things are being restored, and now we have the internet and we're able to look back and go, wait a minute, God's hand is in all of this. Every time 1492, at every point when these large events are happening, we're able to line it up with the Creator who set all things in motion. And I think that this next release of debts is going to be quite inconvenient for most of the dwellers of planet Earth. I think it's going to reshape a lot of things, and don't really know how that's going to plan out. But Alan had his box up, so I will stop yakking yet again.
Alan, did you have a comment?
Hey, Mike. Yeah. So you were talking earlier about the image of George Washington and how he is viewed by historians as honorable and a man that we should admire. And my question is this. Those men rose up and created a revolution against the tyranny of their day. If we honor them and admire them, how do we say that we are not to do such a thing? Rather controversial question, but there are many today who would participate in a government overthrow because of the tyranny that is continuing to build over the past several years. Now with the new threats against freedom of religion, or freedom of worship, as others would call it, where many people who are small business owners or people that have careers would be forced to violate their conscience in order to retain their livelihood. Many people are now disgusted and fed up with the current state of affairs, and how can we say that we would not rise up against our own government? And they did, and they produced a new nation, shedding off the tyranny and creating a godly beginning. What do you think about that?
Well, the one verse I'm thinking of is in Daniel chapter 12. And it says at the end time, the wise will understand. And that's one thing I pray for daily, is to be wise and to have understanding and to follow the God-given wisdom and understanding. And what is appropriate at this time now. And you know, and I think people will have different callings, of course, and that's the one thing. Okay, let's lay aside the discussion. You know, I do believe that there will be people taken from Jerusalem to a place where they're kept safe. I believe it'll be a smaller number of people than what we may have thought in the past, and it may not be the people we were thinking. But that all aside, my thought is that when this all happens, we're going to see the taking away of the city of Jerusalem from the nation of Israel as a way of bringing peace. And they're going to say, peace, peace. We're going to finally have peace in the Middle East. And a lot of people don't know that, you know, they built a wall between the Palestinian side of Jerusalem and the Israeli side, so that's already walled off. And they're building checkpoints from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem currently. And it's known within the Israeli government that the long-term plan is to give Jerusalem back and to lose Jerusalem from, you know, Israel will give up Jerusalem in hopes of national peace. But, you know, and it's all going to be so innocuous that a lot of people are going to wake up and realize, well, something didn't go right, you know. Of course, many Jews won't leave Jerusalem. They're not going to leave the West Bank area, and they'll be dying. They'll be, you know, my thought is that, you know, the world will watch and wonder, well, why aren't they just leaving and saving their life? But most of the people won't know that the Great Tribulation has started until way after it's already started. They're gonna, so, you know, I think that's gonna put everything in our country, all of our issues, way on the back burner. I think their plan is actually possibly within months, if not within a year, to enact the two-state solution. And so that's why I just pray for wisdom daily, so that I will know what to do, because I think the things that we're being distracted by in our country probably are just a distraction, and the reality is what's happening in Jerusalem. And as soon as we have the two-state solution enacted, that's the beginning of the Great Tribulation, and most people will just wake up, read the newspaper, watch TV, and say, oh no. They're going to be caught totally unawares.
Hey, Alan. It's Chris again, as I'm chiming in. The difficulty for us, from a full-blown revolutionary standpoint, is that when the revolution happened, the people were pretty much on the same religious page, and for us, the people. I'm personally surprised that it hasn't already kicked off with the rulings that happened a couple of weeks ago. I can't believe that something hasn't actually happened. But keep in mind that the president has been trying to instigate things to happen. But
Yes.
he's very much trying to start the civil unrest. He wants the water cannons and the tear gas, and he definitely wants the people on the receiving end of that to be those who hold the traditional values. But for us, for the people who know the truth about, Shabbat, Sabbath, and the holy days, and the food, and who Messiah really is, we're growing in numbers, and we're doing it under the radar, but the majority of the people in the country would not respect our beliefs. So I don't know where we're going to fall when this stuff comes down, if it ever comes down. But that's something to keep in our minds, is that the people who are the majority of the people would not have a lot of respect for our belief system, after the shooting stops, I guess is how I would put it.
I have a comment about a revolution. I think the Jesse Helms exercise that's being held, or has been, parts of it have been held already, is anticipation for a revolution. In 1776, we had how many miles of ocean between us and the Brits? I mean, it took them a little while to get here. It took Word a while to get, we would do something, and then 2 weeks later, King George would be like, what did they do? A lot happens in the time it takes for a message to travel across the ocean. And a good example of this is a lot of the revolts that happened in the British Empire that were remote were more successful than, say, a remote in Scotland, where you have England's right there. You know, that helped a lot, and I do believe it was meant to be, that this nation was meant to be here. But I really think there are people thinking of revolt. I think it's brewing, but I think our government is gearing up for the unrest. They're trying to create division, the whole race thing, the whole sexual thing, the whole uh, religious thing is to cause division, because a house divided cannot stand. If the house collapses, you can move in with bulldozers, bulldoze the rubble, and take over. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to divide us. They're going to go to the job. But as for us, I think, it all comes down to revelation. Come out of her, my people, that you do not suffer her plagues. And I think it's just a matter of, this is when we really got to start getting our act together, do the George Washington, the pray every day, every time you have a little bit of adversity, get close to God. That's the only thing I can think of. Because how can you go up against our government right now? Unless the entire nation did it. A lot of people don't realize the whole Second Amendment thing. Oh, protection, protection, protection against thieves. No, Our founding fathers wanted to make sure that the government could be overrun by the people in the event it got corrupt. That's the whole purpose for having the guns. So I think we're past the point of even a revolt. It's just a matter of time. I've told many people that, in my opinion, Jesus Christ cannot return if the United States maintains its present role. And I think pretty soon we're going to be taken out, as unpleasant as it may be. I'm not looking at it. Years ago we used to laugh and joke, 20, 30 years ago, about the future and those evil people and this and that and the other thing. And I was supposed to be either dead or it's supposed to have happened quickly, not be sitting here and watching it happen. So that's my thoughts on the revolt and everything else that, has been going down lately.
Yeah, I have an older friend who's a Seventh-day Adventist, and he's about 75, 76 years old, and we talk every once in a while, and he absolutely said, Chris, sucks to be you. Because he's 75, he's lived his life, and if anything does come down tomorrow, he's not there. And I personally didn't want to be, I don't want to be around to see this stuff, Blessed is he who believes and does not see. I want to be in that crowd.
Any comments from anyone on the telephone? Maybe several on the phone tonight. Feel free to speak up. So that's one thing that stinks about GoToMeeting. If somebody logs in via telephone and listens to it, we can't see or hear or even know they're there.
I'm here. Where is the stone that was taken away? I didn't know it was taken away from Ground Zero.
Oh, is that about the Eretz tree?
Yeah.
Or the stone?
No, the stone.
Taken away specifically because it was in a Harbinger, and it was placed with a different type of a foundation stone.
I understand that, but where did they take that big heavy stone that was a marker that they didn't want the people to see anymore? Where did they take it to?
Okay. It's Long Island at a stone quarry. And I quoted from the owner, and he has out where the public could be, and he holds it in high respect, a high regard, but are disposed of it because it showed up in the Harbinger book.
Is it on Manhattan? Not Manhattan. Staten Island?
No, Long Island.
Oh, it's on Long Island. Okay.
Yeah.
Just wondering because I didn't know it was gone.
Yep. The stone is gone. The tree is gone, the Eretz tree. And basically the government is in a mode of erasing any evidence that any of the things in the Harbinger book ever existed, and basically in a total denial of everything that the book contains.
Thanks for bringing that out.
You're welcome.
I had read the book and I thought everything was still the same as it was. I didn't know the changes.
Yes, they're really okay. We can say that it was a mistake, maybe, that Senator Daschle quoted Isaiah 9 verse 10, out of context, and making the proclamation as a point of arrogance, that we will rebuild, like we're so great. But when it was repeated over and over, and that same verse being quoted over and over by other senators, by governors, and this was all before the book was written. And then once the book was written, all of that is erased. It's like, this is looking back. Hindsight isn't, anything speculative. This is all a matter of history. It's just a matter of, well, is it possible that, such a seemingly insignificant prophecy relating to the 10 tribes of Israel could relate to the United States? That's kind of the question, and it seems like everybody in our audience is basically agreeing, yes, it's a dire warning to our nation, and we agree, that there's something really wrong with our country. And that's the way I look at it. I look at it that there's really something wrong with our country. And, okay, my own synopsis is that we took God out of our country, and I think it was 1962 or 1963, with some very basic changes in our laws, where God was not allowed to be a part of the schools, a part of anything with the government. All references to God were removed in many ways. And then 1973, you had the absolute legalization of abortion. And not only that, say in regard to Alan's question about war, I believe that the supernatural realm started assisting our enemies with the Vietnam War, that we became the evil empire in the 60s, kicking off with the Vietnam War. And there's a lot of accounts of supernatural resistance to our fighter planes. Just watching on the History Channel, the old fighter pilots telling their stories is just amazing. Things that, when we were in the wrong, oppressing other people and going against what our country was founded to do, and becoming the arrogant nation that we are, rejecting God and becoming the great society. So I believe that all happened when I was really young in the 1960s, and watched it all happen, and we went step by step further and further and further away, to where in the 80s we became a totally debt-dependent society to keep our economy going, and then just, increasingly expanding. Instead of being blessed with a profit, we were trying to borrow our way into appearing prosperous. Just like an old landowner or a plantation owner that's trying to keep up appearance to the neighbors, and we're doing everything with debt, as Chris was saying. And so I think the tipping point was in the 60s when, especially President Nixon just started printing money like crazy. There's a big history there, and then he took us off the gold standard. I mean, it's just by executive order, yeah. So it all didn't start with President Obama. I think it started with Lyndon Johnson, actually, and John Kennedy was disposed of by the powers that be, is the way I look at it, and because he wouldn't go along with it, but Lyndon Johnson was willing to go along with the present great society that we were trying to create, the New World Order, and the secular New World Order, I think they call it. And so I think we're quite progressed in this, and that I remember being at the Promise Keepers prayer rally in Washington, D.C. in the 90s. There was about close to 1 million men that appeared there and spent a day in prayer. And I think President Clinton was quite amazed. He actually went up in the helicopter and flew over just to look at all the people. And, we hoped, well, there'd be some warning or some thought of, well, maybe we're not going the right way. Well, then you had the 9/11 attack, which was the first attack right on our mainland soil that we ever had. Then we had the collapse of the whole international banking system in 2008. Well, you'd think that'd be another warning shot that we would hear. And all we do is we just keep responding with more defiance and going further and further into creating the what the international New World Order, the socialist New World, one world government. And our present administration is just bound to take us there. He wants to get Israel out of Jerusalem before the end of his term. He wants to create a civil war in our country, and hoping maybe. My thought is maybe he's hoping that elections would be suspended and he'd just stay as a dictator for life. But I mean, I think that our present state has been coming for since the 1960s.
Well, I have one more thought about people taking up arms and going against the government here, which I know is why it was put in the Bill of Rights to be able to build or have arms, have guns. It wasn't just for hunting and that kind of stuff or self-protection. But as with Joshua and Gideon and the others that God appointed, whenever a nation had reached the fullness of their sin, God ordered that they be wiped out. Now, that being said, in this day and age, with this nation being so fluoridated into submission and just following like sheep whatever they're being told and all the entitlements to keep them in line, it would be very hard to see anybody actually picking up the guns or the taking up the fight. There may be some out there, but I think it's past the point where us as humans with, and I don't think that's the way God plans on doing it now. We've had our chance, and I think now it's going to be God intervening, and we're just going to have to depend on Him to do what needs to be done to straighten this nation out, because it's just a sad state of affairs. People have to be told not to put a plastic bag over their face. How are they going to think about standing up for what's right instead of just complaining? We're all talk. But anyway, that's my thought on that. And I would never be part of the war because it's just the way it is. But I still have thoughts about if we could have, if it wasn't the way it was supposed to turn out, something needed to be done a long time ago. But anyway, I'll listen to everybody else's comments.
Any other people on the telephone that would like to make a comment? Or just say hello?
I've got some comments. I think what we forget to look at is what it also talks about in Revelation when it's talking to the churches about the suffering that's going to happen. The churches are warned that there's going to be suffering that's going to happen to us. And also the martyrdom. You've got scriptures that say you're counted worthy to be martyred. And all of these things are to glorify and honor God. Peter was told by what death he was going to die in order to glorify God. This is part of what some of our calling is to honor God in this way. And I think when you look at these people that had their heads taken off, when you look at what they went through, and you look at the courage, and you look at these people who conquered evil, we tend to go, fearful. We don't want that to happen. We get all concerned about saving our life, and you miss the spiritual intent and what's going on. These men that had their head taken off, they were not groveling in fear, begging to let them live. They were courageous. Evil wanted to take them down and did not do it, could not do it, because of these men standing for what was right. And they won. That was victory. And that's what Christ did. And that, those who are going to be martyred in the end time, you've got to be willing to give it all up and to stand for what is right when evil wants to control you, wants to make you angry and rebel, wants to have you hate, wants to have you deny Christ. We have to have that mindset that we are willing to let this life go because we've got this spiritual stuff happening that we're heading toward.
Yeah, well, this is Chris DeWeese again to talk about that and the suffering and the pain that we're going to go through. Unfortunately, a lot of Christianity has been told that they're not going to go through it, but the reality, the juxtaposition against these Christians who are overseas who are getting their heads cut off versus the entire denominations in our country that caved to gay marriage when it was just a threat. You look at the Episcopals, the Methodists. You think John Wesley's going to be happy at the resurrection when he finds out what happened to his church? I mean, it's really amazing, and you really hit on a great point about the entitlements. You're not going to raise up arms against the country that you depend upon for your subsistence. If you need that country for your school loan, you need that country for your Medicare, your Medicaid, your Social Security, you need that country for the little bitty stipend that they give you so that you can live, it makes it very difficult to stand up against them. But as far as we go, much like Stephen understood that to take his life, he knew where he was going. He knew he was going to that first resurrection. And we have to be very forgiving as well, because there are going to come a time, and it is here, where the people who will persecute us think that they're doing God's will. They think it's God's will for us to tolerate sin. They think it's God's will for us to tolerate these things that are clearly abominations in the law. And we need to have the same mindset as Yeshua, as the Messiah, as Christ, and say, Lord, forgive them, they know not what they do. And that's going to be a difficult thing, because right now we're all feeling like we're feeling this stuff is slipping away, and we look at our kids. I have kids, 13, 11, and 8, and I look at them and I'm like, I don't want them to go through what's coming. I want to fight. I want to find a way out of this. I want to find a way, but you know what? The way out of this is the millennial kingdom. The way out of this is Isaiah 66, Isaiah 65, Zechariah 14. The way out of this is when there is no more sorrow, there is no more tears, and that when we do live 1,000 years where mankind will actually observe the appointed times, and mankind will observe the Jubilee year. And today, all we could do is what Don was saying, is be very merciful, be very faithful, be very prayerful, and try to witness to people so that when these things do come, that we keep the bigger picture in mind. And I'll tell you, being a whopping 42 years old, what I want to do and what I ought to do are two entirely different things. So, thank you.
Alan?
Hey, Mike. When I was talking about rebelling against what's happening, I was not speaking of taking up arms, which seems the way everybody took it right away. But we are already rebels. As you know, you are a nonconformist in our world. And you have already done those things and taken actions and inactions to make yourself a rebel against Babylon. The only forceful revolution would be done by the military itself. As the people who are regular flyovers, as they call them, the small people like us, of course we have no means to physically overthrow our government. I wasn't really referring to taking up arms. Our lifestyle is what makes us revolt and rebel. And your lifestyle can cause you to come into martyrdom. Isn't that true? And so to what degree you allow yourself to be in a high profile of rebellion against the Babylonian system will determine how much exposure you have to those who would want to crush you out. Now we see throughout biblical history those who came up against systems of government. Look what Esther did when she made her plan and said, if I perish, I perish. She came up against Haman, a very powerful figure in that government. And she took a great risk for the people. And it wasn't that she took up arms. Our rebelliousness, per se, is going to be what we say openly and what we do. And of course, those things proceed from what we think first. Right? All our actions and our words and our deeds are preceded by our thoughts. And so if we are out there with who we really are, that's a revolt in itself. I hear all this talk on talk radio about the thing to do in America now is to just refuse to submit to the powers that be concerning these things that are sinful. And that's what a lot of people are saying. That's what the talk is in a lot of circles.
Means civil disobedience?
Yeah. Well, I've been practicing on my wife.
You know, I agree totally with what you're saying, and the way I view it is I want to have a public record of all of my points of view. I want the social media to know everything I think. I want anybody watching in NSA to know exactly where I stand, so if the time comes, I could be thoroughly convicted of being a Christian in any court of law.
But we need to realize that we are no threat to the elite level of people who are controlling the world. They don't care about you and me.
No.
Just because we have opinions that are contrary to their agenda, it means nothing to them. I don't think they're coming after you, Mike, or me.
Well, Don and I have talked about this, and if indeed we do, we're part of the group that does wake up one morning and the Great Tribulation has already started, rather than go and hide and seek to escape and suffer through to the very end, we think it's best to get up in a soapbox and start preaching against the government and against the sins and telling people biblically exactly what's happening, and do it with such a force and a severity that they martyr us as quick as they can. that would be, you know, if indeed, you know, I am in the Great Tribulation, I'd want to, you know, I would look forward to witnessing to every person that I could, and especially the government powers that be, and you know, like you're saying, use all means of social resistance possible, and to be a witness at that time, you know, to tell people exactly what's happening and what their future is, and you know, and warn people. I think it'll be the time of the greatest revival in history, is after the tribulation starts, and our economy is in shambles, and you know, people have free time. All they're looking to do is get enough food to make it through another day. I think that's a time when people are going to really turn to God. and they're going to look to anybody they can talk to get all the information they can, and with the hope being that they don't accept the mark of the beast when it comes. So I think that's a job that each and every one of us can do if we, find ourselves in that position, is to help others to avoid the mark of the beast, to give them all the information they need so they can make the right choice.
I've often said and thought about, the whole martyrdom thing, and it isn't so much the death part that worries me. It's all the pain and suffering before. And we were talking about, lingering on and being tortured and maimed and mutilated and doing all this, what the apostles went through. But that's why Mike and I were talking. I want to get up there and get on the soapbox so they go, shut up. And I get a 30-30 between the eyes, and it's all over, quick and simple.
The problem for me would be watching other people suffer and not being able to help them.
Yes, and that's especially if you have a family. So you'd want to make sure that your family is taken care of, and the children. And those are the things that we're all going to, I'm saying generally speaking, maybe not us personally, but there's a lot of people out there that definitely are on the side of biblical Christianity, and maybe they're not doing everything right at this point, and maybe they're even living their life foolishly at this point. But when the rubber meets the road, they're going to be looking for people to help them, guide them, fill them in with the biblical information that they've been neglecting in their own studies, and we can do a great role in helping the people that truly want to serve God to lead them into truth. So we want to do everything we can, and we know that there, the fifth seal is the martyrdom of the saints. So we know that there'll be, maybe even the great majority of saints will be martyred during the tribulation. And we can see it all happening. The whole thing is all coming together in such an incredible way. It's just like, a lot of people are thinking about it right now. It's on a lot of people's minds, and you can talk to a lot of people about the Bible right now. A lot of people are becoming very interested in wondering, well, is this that end time that everybody's been talking about? Even people that never believed in it before.
Yet at the same time...
Mike,
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Alan.
Mike, I'll ask you one more question. And I think you'll recognize this question. Peradventure there be 20 righteous. Would you then choose not to destroy the city? Be not angry with me, Lord, but what if there only be 10 righteous? Would you then refrain from destroying the city?
I've been involved in a fair amount of intercessory prayer for the nation. Maybe it was with other religious groups, maybe other denominations. But that's something I believe in, is to be interceding. And, that's a very real thing, is to be praying. And another thing that I believe in praying for daily is the nation of Israel. We know that has to be a number of Jewish people that will be called. We know that there needs to be a complete and a thorough witness to the nation before they are surrounded and destroyed. So God needs to do a big witness there, and there also needs to be the separating out and actually the consecrating of the young people who will live through the Great Tribulation and come back from the concentration camps and re-inhabit the land. And the temple will be set up. The Levites will be given back their job. The priests will be given back their job. And there will need to be staff there at the beginning of the millennium. And I believe it's a good thing to be praying for those young people right now, that they receive protection from the enemy who would kill them, with a bomb or a rocket. And I'm just believe in praying for protection for the young Israelis that will live over into the millennium, and as well as all of the people, because we understand that there will be people that will live through the tribulation. We understand that there will be people that will be martyred, and there will be those that are kept safe, from all of the final plagues. And then there will be the wedding supper, and there will be the reestablishment of God's kingdom on earth. And so all these things need to happen. There needs to be a witness in Jerusalem to warn the people. There needs, the prophet needs to speak to the people before the calamity comes. And so all of these things need to be taking place. And there need to be open doors, and there needs to be financial provision. There's a lot of things that need to happen in this world. And then, and no man knows the day or the hour, but when it happens, then the work, you might say, the work begins. And there has to be a great revival. Not everybody's going to accept the mark of the beast. And Alan, you actually, is something I never thought of before. There might even be some martyrs shooting back when they're martyred. It might be two-way gunfire with some people.
Well, Mike, when I was saying, what if there be 10 righteous, would you not destroy the city? What I'm trying to imply here is there enough corruption and wickedness in our land today that it would be justifiable for the downfall of our nation? Or are there many righteous people still spread across this land that maybe his hand would be held back at this time, and we may live to be old then before it finishes and runs its course?
Well, the key is in Israel. I think one misconception when I was young was that the Great Tribulation would start with atom bombs attacking America. And as I read the scriptures more thoroughly and became more familiar with the Hebrew language, the prophecies are for Eretz Yisrael, the land, the actual land of Israel, and that Judah would be back in Jerusalem. And that didn't happen until 1967. So before that, it wasn't even conceivable to think of Jerusalem literally being the place that would be surrounded and attacked. But we may not have any problems here well after the time that the Great Tribulation starts. We're part of the Roman Empire. We're a Gentile nation, and I believe we have a lot of Israelites in the nation. But we have a broad spectrum of nationalities in this nation, and a broad spectrum of religious beliefs, and so I think that in our nation we probably won't be touched as much. The general flyover people, you might say. There's going to be a whole lot of people watching what happens in the Middle East when the 10 peoples surround Jerusalem and take the Jews captive. And I think a lot of our citizens will be rejoicing that finally the Israel problem is finished. But we'll know better since we know the Bible, and we know that when they go in and surround Jerusalem and forcibly, kill and extract the Jews out in order to establish an international city and a Palestinian state. Well, we know that that's it. That's the end. And so really, the focus isn't here. And I'm actually open to different points of view on the Harbinger, because it's not all about New York, but amazingly enough, it looks like New York is mentioned in a biblical prophecy. That America is, that there is a special purpose for the United States in the plan of God. And we do have more Jews living here than any other country in the world except Israel itself. And we're very much a nation based upon the God of Israel. So there is a significance to the Harbinger. But we always have to remember that the Bible literally talks about the Great Tribulation in terms of what happens in the Middle East. Not in Europe, not in the United States, not in China. The Great Tribulation is for Israel, and for specifically Judah, the land of Israel, the Israelis. And so as we're watching this all happen, our life could go on as normal for a while. But the vice is going to tighten. It's going to get tighter and tighter and tighter. And finally, it's going to come down to, well, if you're not in line with the new world order, whatever it is, and you don't, and if you don't, we're looked upon as Judaizers, as Sabbath keepers. So really, when the time comes and the world power that exists wants to commit genocide against all Israelites, well, I already know this from Russia. If you do anything Jewish, you're considered a Jew. You're considered an Israelite, a Judaizer. You're not a true Christian because, the Orthodox Christianity and the Roman Catholics believe that you have to reject all Judaism to become the true spiritual Israel. So I think that the whole thing is going to be centered around destroying the Jewish race, the Jewish religion, the Jewish people, and anybody that's sympathetic to them.
I was going to say, when we were talking about people be yearning to know, at the same time, I'm noticing an anger against anyone who says they're religious or they worship God. It went from, okay, you're the weirdo at work, to I hate you. There's this zeal to destroy anything that's considered righteous. There's a fire that I think has erupted in the last 2 years against anything Christian. And I'm sure the adversary is busy right now.
On steroids.
Mike?
Yes.
Yes, I got a question for you. As far as with the revival, when do you feel that there's going to take place?
Well, okay. Right now, everybody's busy working, trying to get enough money to pay their bills. They want to have some enjoyment in life, do a little recreation, things like that. But when all of that is taken away, whether it's our economy collapsing or however it works out in our country, a lot of people will have a whole lot of time on their hands, and they're going to be wondering about, well, what's going on in the world. And I think then people will be really crying out to God, save me, help me, I don't know what's happening. And a lot of nominal people especially.
So my next question is, are you familiar with the last half of Proverbs 1?
Oh, well, yes, but you could make me specifically familiar as
Well,
to.
it talks about this. It says, because I have called you and you refused, I have stretched out my hand and no one regarded, because you disdained all my counsel. So then it talks about, I will also laugh at your calamity. I will mock when your terror comes. When your terror comes like a storm, your destruction comes like a whirlwind. When distress and anguish come upon you, then they will call upon me, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but they will not find me, because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord. They would have none of my counsel. They despised my every rebuke. Therefore they shall eat the fruit of their own way, and be filled to the full with their own fancies. For the turning away of the simple will slay them. The complacency of fools will destroy them. So to me, it almost, I mean, I don't know how this here fits in, but, say like when 9/11 hit, people got a little religious. And, could that have been the time when God called them, or called people? But then they refused because it didn't last very long. And now, we're going to get what we deserve because we didn't, because we never answered. We refused his instruction.
Last half.
And then I guess I'd like to read 3 other verses that pertain to what's going on nowadays. Psalms 11:3. It says, if the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? And the foundations there is talking both political and moral. And then I'd like to, then in Psalms 82:5, they do not know, nor do they understand. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are unstable. And then in Psalm 17 or 16:7, and this is kind of an answer to the question of Psalms 11:3. If the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? And 16:7, I will bless the Lord who has given me counsel. My heart also instructs me in the night season. And actually, in concordance for the night season, is talking about anxiety. So I think we're in that dark season where it talks about in Psalms 82:5. So my thought on that, I guess.
Oh, I agree totally. And the word I used was revival, not Bible. So I was talking about Christians that were more, Christians but lackadaisical.
Yeah.
Huge revival. And meanwhile, the love of the most will just be, getting colder and colder and more defiant, like our president, just more and more increasingly defiant as there's more trials and tribulations. And another passage that really goes along with what you're saying is in Isaiah chapter 5. And we could go off on a whole other subject on that, because I mean that's a whole Bible study by itself as to especially Israel, because the great tribulation is upon the land of Israel, the nation of Israel, for their abominations. Well, it starts in 5 verse 1, and then it gives a story, and so you just go through the whole story. And and it basically it says, what can I do more for my people? And it's Zion. What can I do more for Zion that I could not have done? And that strings out into more prophecies later in Isaiah, because the question does have an actual answer. He will tell you what he's going to do. And so it's not a strictly rhetorical question. in Isaiah 5 verse 4, where it says, "What more could I have done for my vineyard that I have not done?" And so the great tribulation is on Israel, and for their abominations, and you can follow that string of scriptures going right back to Deuteronomy chapter 32, where the Great Tribulation is first referenced, and the returning of the Messiah, and it's a subject going all the way through all of the Old Testament prophets. You have the Great Tribulation referenced in Jeremiah chapter 30, Ezekiel chapter 5, Daniel chapter 12, and then in the New Testament in Matthew 24, Mark, Luke, John, all reference, and that connects right to the book of Revelation. And so the Great Tribulation is a time of punishment upon Israel. And so the nation of Israel is going to be, there will be the few people that will be part of the first resurrection, but the majority of them will just suffer and die in the tribulation. And then the final year, the day of the Lord, is when God's wrath goes out on all those who have accepted the mark of the beast. And that's when the people in the Gentile nations will go through a living hell because they've pretty much, they've martyred the saints. So I'm not looking for a big revival as far as numbers, but I think it'll be the greatest resurrection of nominal Christians that know what this is, and they've made a commitment to God, and they've just been kind of asleep and foolish. And but I can't say as to how many, but I do believe that when people are in a time of trouble, that they will, the ones that have been not on fire for God, full steam all along, the ones that have been a little more lackadaisical, they're going to be, they need to be guided, and so they make the right choices, and there'll be a lot of questions. Maybe we knew a church from years ago, but it just kind of walked away from Christianity. Hopefully, that they'll wake up and not accept the mark of the beast, but knowing a lot of them, well, they're pretty much opposed to the God of the Bible, and they might be first in line to sign up for the mark of the beast, as you're saying.
I'd like to read one more thing, and that's in Psalms 2, that a guy can take comfort in. It says, "Why do the nations rage and the people plot a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and his anointed, saying, Let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall hold them in derision. He shall speak to them in his wrath and distress them in his deep displeasure." So we know that whatever their plans are, it's not going to come to naught.
Well, I think I have and others have done the math, and through that whole 3.5-year process, only about 10% of the people in the whole world will live through it. 90% will die. And then if you look at that, the billions of people, there will be only a very small number that'll be resurrected in the first resurrection. So basically I agree totally with what you're saying, and I'm talking more or less maybe family, maybe friends, maybe people that know better and are just not really with it. So when they see it all happening and they realize, well, I learned about this as a child, I know what it is. This is a great tribulation, and I don't want to take the mark of the beast. Others might be, hey, sign me up. You hope the best, I guess, but I think that and that's what the essence of this tonight is, that our nation, we know something about God. Most people have some biblical reference to look to from their childhood or whatever, and they are just so defiant against it. And I believe thoroughly that our nation's response to the warnings that God is giving is shaking the fist right back at God and saying, we will rebuild. We don't need you. There is no such thing as God. I believe in me is a mood in our nation. I believe in us. I believe in me. I don't believe in God.
All right, thank you.
Any other comments?
Oh, Mike, this is Al Turner again. I wanted to add to my last comment. The other way we revolt against the system and make it known what our position is by economics. As Chris was saying earlier, that we've seen in 2008 the economic problem, and that's what Jonathan Kahn talks about. Well, we have to choose how we spend our money. And part of how we revolt is by boycotting products. If masses of people who are trying to repent because they see things happening start to coordinate how they spend their money, what little bit we have, people take notice of that. It is an effective means of drawing attention when there's an economic impact. So that's also a part of how we, not just how we conduct ourselves, not just with what we do and say, but economically we have an influence in our communities. That's all I wanted to say. I also wanted to say thank you for the thoughtful presentation and for all the preparation and work you did to bring that to us.
Well, thank you, and you're welcome. Regarding money, I guess it's all scheduled for October 21st to change over the currencies by the World Bank. I've been watching some presentations on that people inside the World Bank are talking about, and I think they want it to be known. We've been in a 3-year process to disconnect the dollar from the world currencies and as the world reserve currency, and it's been a step-by-step process that's been public, and there's been a few bumps in the road. I think people were hoping we would have already, I think the 3-year point was last February, and we still haven't done that. But I think one of the things we can look at when talking about the Shemitah and the Jubilee year is that the World Bank and all the other nations of the world have an alternative money system. And it's led by the Russians, the Chinese, India, Brazil, and South Africa. They call them the BRICS. And the Chinese especially have established a new Asian bank. And so I'm not sure how much we'll notice it, but our currency will no longer exist in its present form. It'll may still be called dollars, but we'll have a whole new world banking system by October. And that's been in the plans. If you've been watching, it's been in the works for 3 years now, and it's a little behind schedule. But it's in its final stages. So who knows what they have planned for us when that happens.
If the dollar is no longer the base currency, that basically means financially we're finished.
There will be a reset somehow. They've talked about it. But what the Russians have wanted to do, and this is why they assassinated Gaddafi also. He was the presiding leader, or the president for 1 year of OPEC, in the year they killed him, and he was advocating that the oil-producing nations only receive gold for the oil, and the banking system wasn't going to stand for that, so they rubbed him out and put his nation into shambles. They were the second most prosperous nation and the highest in Africa, and the highest overall satisfaction on the UN World Index of standard of living. And we basically went in and put the country into a rubble because he wanted to go to a gold standard. Russia was working right along with that, and they actually have plans to go to 100% gold standard ruble, and they're just waiting to do it in concert with the other nations. And they're totally out of debt, national debt, and they can do it. They have the gold, and they're buying back all their rubles from all the other countries in the world, so they have all the rubles back in Russia. And China's also been buying a lot of gold, and they want to reestablish a new money system for the world. So how that'll work out for us, and maybe October 21st won't be the date. That's their present start date. We can keep in prayer that isn't the actual date, I guess.
An interesting fact about our currency and the national debt, all of the gold that's ever been mined, that's ever known about, that's ever existed, and that exists today at $2,000 an ounce adds up to about, and there's a debate on the actual number, but they all agree that all the numbers are somewhere between 7 trillion and 11 trillion. And where's our debt today? There's not enough gold or gold, silver, and platinum in the world to pay our national debt. That's how far in we are. There has to be a reset because we're beyond, there's no value to our system. And so it stinks. The whole thing stinks having lived through this. This is supposed to happen another time. Someone else.
Yes. My mom says regularly that she's glad that her life is almost at its end. They lived through some good years, the previous generation. And they had some bad years too, but when we look at what's happening in this world, it's not a lot of good news. And I really believe that our nation is like an old plantation owner that just doesn't want to face the shame of not putting on the parties, not being important around all the peers, and we're so far in hock that there's no way we can hold on to the title to our plantation. Someone else owns it already.
So is there any other comments If not, we'll bring this the session to an official close.